do it for you.
Why you wanna move like that? Why you want gone? Why you want act like that? Why you play hard? Unless you heard it from me, then you ain't heard it from me. Got it from me, all the energy extra.
I do it for you.
Whole gang, whole man, old school, young jam, all black, MZ, still screaming out that chain gang. Couple hits to the face. I know that I need time now, so I gotta call right my way.
I do it for you.
Now let me throw it.
I do it for you.
Why they wanna move like that?
I do it for you.
Why they wanna move like that? Why you want gone? Why you want act like that? Why you play hard? Unless you heard it from me, then you ain't heard it from me. Got it from me, all the energy extra.
I do it for you.
Whole gang, whole man, old school, young jam, all black, MZ, still screaming out that chain gang. Couple hits to the face. I know that I need time now, so I gotta call right my way.
I do it for you.
Why they wanna move like that? Why they wanna move like that? Why you want gone? Why you want act like that? Why you play hard?
I do it for you.
Get girls but ain't a gallus. Sold shit but ain't a killer. I held a gun but ain't a killer. Can I keep it any realer?
I do it for you.
Hello and welcome to Roadrone. In this part of the video, I'm going to be showing you the basics of playing Roadrone. So the first thing you're going to want to do in order to have the best experience for Roadrone is connect your controller to your computer in order to control the drone. Now, if your controller is not supported by Roblox, what you can do is under social links, you can go to my YouTube channel, and once at my YouTube channel, we can scroll down, and if you watch the video on add controller support, this will show you how to add controller support for your unsupported controller. Then once you've set up your controller, the next thing you're going to want to do is come over to the input settings by pressing this button at the top left, and over here you're going to want to first select a preset depending on which type of input you're using. So if you're using a radio controller, you want to select this preset. If you're using a game controller, you want to select this preset. And if you're using a touchscreen, you want to use the touch preset. And finally, if you're using a keyboard, you want to select the keyboard preset. Now, once we've set up our input, the next thing we're going to want to do is know the keys to play the game. So if we go over to this help sign over here, here we can see a list of all the keys to do an action within the game. So we can see that pressing the E key or pressing the B button on our game controller is used to spawn a drone. So if I press E, we spawn a drone. If I press E again, we despawn the drone. So let's now go over every menu in the game. The first button at the top left is the chat button. And this opens the chat window, which can be moved around the screen and can also be resized by dragging the corners of the window, like so. And we can close this window by pressing the X. The next window is the player list button, and this button allows us to see all players in the server. We can press the camera icon next to a player to spectate that player. And if we want to go back to our own player, we press the camera button next to our own username. And if we want to send a private message to someone, we can press the message button. So for instance, if I want to send a message to myself, this window will pop up, and here I can type a message to myself. The next button is the drone button, which opens the drone window. Here I can select any drone I own to fly. And if I want to, I can change the settings of each drone. So for instance, here we can see thrust. Now here we can see 3 numbers for thrust. Now if we want to know what this number does, we can simply delete the number and we can see that it says minimum. And this one says maximum. So this sets the minimum thrust and this sets the maximum thrust. Now, if you make a mistake while configuring this drone, for instance, if I set the maximum amount of thrust to 9999, and I now want to go back to the original settings, next to the X button, the close button, we can press this reset button, which will reset all these settings back to default. So I can press this button over here, and we can see it goes back to 80 and to a camera angle of 15. And this button over here brings up the settings window. And in this window, we have a list of settings. The first setting is private chat. And if we turn private chat off, this will prevent players from disturbing us when we're flying. So if I now try to send myself a private message, we can see that it says private chat disabled, and this message was not delivered to me. The next setting is player icons. So if we look in the sky, we can see icons of each player's drone. So we can see the players flying around. And if I turn player icons off, we can see that their icons for their drone disappears. And I can turn it back on, and now we can see their icons once again. The next setting is stick overlay. We can turn this on to view our sticks, and we can turn this off to hide our sticks. The next setting is spectators. And if someone is spectating us, at the bottom left of the screen, you'll see a small icon of who's spectating you. Now, if you want to hide them icons, you can set this setting to off. But if you want to see who's spectating you, you can turn this on. The next option is action buttons. Now, if we move our window to over here, and if I turn this to on, here we can see we have 2 buttons. This is the jump button, and this is the spawn drone button. Now, if we want, we can turn these buttons off or on, or we can also set it to automatic, which will turn them on when you have a touch screen, and turn them off when you don't have a touch screen. The next option is speed indicator. So we can set it to studs per second. So when I move, we can see that I move at 18 studs per second. I can move this to meters per second, feet per second, kilometers per hour, and miles per hour. The next 2 settings are volume, and then we have our camera settings. So if I spawn the drone, we can see that I'm currently flying in first person mode. And if I change this to follow mode, now the camera will follow the drone from behind. And I can also go to free mode, which allows me to freely rotate the camera around the drone. And finally, we have sight, which allows me to fly line of sight. And the next setting is responsiveness, which allows us to adjust how responsive the camera is. So if I start moving my character from left and right, and if I set responsiveness down to 5, we can see that it takes a longer time for the camera to catch up with the character. And if I turn responsiveness all the way out to 100, and now we can see that the camera is locked to the character. The next option is the field of view. And then we have the option of VR motion. So what VR motion does is, if you have it set to off and you're using a VR headset, if you move your head, it will not move the camera. But if you have VR motion set to on, now if you move your head, it will move the camera. And finally, we have the environment settings. So this setting allows us to adjust the time of day. And if we set it to sync, then the time will automatically go from day to night, and this will be in sync with all other players in the game. We also have the clouds, where we can have lots of clouds or no clouds, and we can also have this set to sync to be in sync with other players in the game. And finally, we have terrain distance, which allows us to determine how far we can see the terrain. Now, if you have a slow computer, you want to set terrain distance to a low number, but if you have a powerful computer, we can set this to a higher number. And once you start flying your drone for the very first time, it's going to feel very difficult to control, and you want to keep practicing, and slowly over time you'll improve. And once you feel confident enough to take off and land safely, then you'll be ready to fly a real drone.